The Sixth Amendment, right to counsel. According to the Sixth Amendment, in all criminal prosecutions, the defendant should enjoy the right to counsel. But we do need to understand what we mean by this discussion of a right to counsel in this context. We do not mean the issue here we have is not if the defendant has money, the defendant could afford his own attorney, whether he could bring his attorney to court to defend himself in a criminal trial. Of course, the defendant has that right because this right is specifically provided for in the Sixth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. The issue of this right to counsel is really under what circumstances indigent defendants should enjoy this state-appointed free counsel. Because if a defendant has money, he could always bring his own counsel to court to defend himself, but many defendants are indigent. They could not afford to hire their own attorney. So what will happen to them? Should they go through trial without legal representation, or should the state appoint free counsel for them? So that is really the issue we have. That is a right to counsel for these indigent defendants. It is very important for us to point out for a long time in the U.S. history, that is after the adoption of the U.S. Constitution, after the adoption of this Sixth Amendment, for a long time in the U.S. history, the situation was if the defendant had money, the defendant could hire his own attorney to defend himself in a criminal trial. But if a defendant was indigent, if the defendant did not have the money to hire a lawyer, and then the defendant would have to go through trial without legal representation. This was the case for a long, long time in the U.S. history. Why we say that? Because the U.S. Supreme Court, the first time the U.S. Supreme Court addressed the issue of a legal representation of indigent defendants was in this case, Powell versus Alabama. The case was decided in 1932. That was the first time the court addressed this issue. So before this case, the situation was if the defendant had the money, he could hire his own lawyer. If the defendant could not afford a lawyer, and then he had to go through trial without legal representation. But in this case, Powell versus Alabama, the court for the first time addressed this issue. We know what happened in this case. In this case, a group of African American boys was on a freight train going through Alabama. And on the same train, there was also a group of white boys. And then there was a fight between these two groups. And then this group of white boys was being thrown off the train. And then, of course, now we know on the train only we had this group of black boys over there. But on the train, there was also two white girls. And then these two white girls just said this group of black boys actually raped them. So after that, and then this group of African-American boys, they were arrested, they were brought to trial under very hostile circumstances. And then because they were not from Alabama, they could not have, and then they could not afford to hire their own attorneys, so they just went through trial without any legal representation. And as a result, they were convicted and also sentenced to death in a trial without any legal representation. So after their conviction, this case was appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. The ruling of the U.S. Supreme Court was the conviction could not stand, because the court said this is a capital case. If the defendant was indigent, the defendants must have this state-appointed free counsel. If there was no legal representation, the court simply cannot sentence the defendants to death. So the court overturned the conviction and then sent the case back for retrial. So after this Powell versus Alabama, it was established in capital cases, if the defendant is indigent, there must be state-appointed counsel. This case is a very important case because this is the first time the U.S. Supreme Court addressed the issue of legal representation for indigent defendants. But at the same time, this case is also, this court decision is also a narrow one. Why it is a narrow one? Because this ruling is limited to capital cases. If in a case, if the defendant is going to be sentenced to death, and then according to this decision, the indigent defendant should enjoy state-appointed free counsel. But in non-capital cases, and then the situation remained the same. If the defendant had money, he could hire his own lawyer. If the defendant was indigent, could not afford his own counsel, and then he had to go through trial without any legal representation. So in that sense, this Powell versus Alabama, this decision was a narrow decision. It was a significant step forward because the court actually began to address the issue of indigent defendants' legal representation, but nonetheless, this case was just limited to these capital cases. This court decision was just limited to capital cases. The next one. The next case is Bess versus Brady, and in this case, the court went, maybe we can say, a small step further. The court said in non-capital cases, if there were special circumstances, and then the indigent defendant may also have this state-appointed free counsel. By special circumstances, we mean if the case is complicated, or if the defendant is illiterate, the defendant could not read, and those are what we mean by special circumstances. But if in a case there were no special circumstances, once again, the defendant would not have this, indigent defendants could not request for state-appointed free counsel. The next case we are going to discuss is this Gideon versus Wainwright. This decision is a truly very important decision. The decision was made in 1963. In this case, the court actually made a very big step forward in this legal representation for indigent defendants. In this case, Gideon was on trial. Gideon was charged with this breaking and entering. Breaking and entering in the state of Florida, that was a felony. So in this. At this point, I think it is important for us to point out you should understand this distinction between felony and misdemeanor. Felony is a crime punishable by more than 1 year imprisonment. Misdemeanor is a crime punishable by less than 1 year imprisonment. So these are breaking and entering, that is actually burglary. It is a felony. Okay, so in this case, the issue is whether in a felony case, if the defendant was indigent, whether the defendant should have the right to request state-appointed counsel. So that is why the case is important, because we know many crimes are punishable by more than 1 year imprisonment. So many crimes actually are felonies. So if the court would say in a felony case, the defendant, if indigent, should have this right to request state-appointed counsel, and then many indigent defendants would be covered by this case. So that's why this case is important. In the case, Gideon could not afford his own lawyer, so he made a request at the beginning of the trial. He said, I could not afford my own lawyer, and could a lawyer be appointed to me? And then his request was rejected. The court informed Gideon. The court said, we could not really appoint a counsel for you because your case is not capital case. According to this Powell versus Alabama, only in capital cases, the indigent defendant may request state-appointed counsel. The judge just told Gideon, your case is not a capital case, so you are not entitled to state-appointed counsel. If you don't have money, and then you just have to go through trial without legal representation. So Gideon had to go through trial without any legal representation. Gideon actually defended himself. It is important for us to point out, Gideon actually did not commit this crime. We have this prosecution's chief witness. This prosecution's witness actually went to court to testify against Gideon. What happened was this prosecution's witness, this person actually was the one who committed this burglary. This witness with another person, his partner, and they actually broke into this pool room. So this witness actually at the time was serving as a lookout while his partner broke into the pool room. So while the witness was serving as a lookout, he happened to see Gideon on the street. So when the police investigated the case, who actually broke into this pool room, so this witness just named Gideon. That was actually what happened. But of course, because this witness named Gideon, so Gideon became the defendant in this case, and Gideon was brought to trial. Gideon could not get this counsel, so he had to defend himself. So this prosecution's witness testified against Gideon. Gideon conducted his cross-examination. It should be pointed out, according to evidence law, if a witness has a criminal record, this criminal record can be asked, can be examined. And then Gideon just went to the witness and he just asked this witness, have you ever been arrested? And then the prosecutor stood up saying, objection. And then the court said, sustained. Meaning is Gideon's question was not proper. And then we said, this witness's criminal record should be examined. Why Gideon's question was not proper? Because according to evidence law, you cannot ask, have you been arrested? But you can ask, have you been convicted of a felony? But this is a technicality, and Gideon could not understand. So that's why he asked this question, and then the prosecutor objected, and then the judge said sustained. So Gideon was totally confused about this in this court proceeding. And then there is also an issue of a leading question. We're going to discuss this leading question in the following video.